ערב טוב, אני איתה הבכורה, אז מגיע לי הזכות להיות ראשונה. אני מנצלת, אבל אני אעשה בעברית, באנגלית, ובאיזשהו שלב מישהו יכול לתרגם לכם. As the oldest and therefore the first to speak, I will take this opportunity to do an Uncle Alvin and give you a brief history of my dad, Irwin Krasna, Zichrono Livracha. Dad was born on June 23rd, 1929, just a few minutes after his twin Alvin. Dad had an older sister, Selma, who actually had the same birthday as the twins, and a younger sister, Debbie. Their parents, Selig and Esther, both came to the United States as young children in the 1880s from Europe. Papi from Czechoslovakia, Poland, and Grandma from Odessa, which she referred to as White Russia. They settled their family in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, and Dad and Uncle Alvin went to Yeshiva Crown Heights and Torah Vodaas. The family lived in a cramped 3-bedroom apartment and included their 2 grandfathers, Zaida Feiner and Zaida Krasna. As twins, they were very mischievous, and Dad and Uncle Alvin used to tell us great stories about those times, but I'm not sharing them here. The twins then attended Yeshiva University, where they excelled in their studies, learning in Rav Soloveitchik Shir and studying sciences. Even though Uncle Alvin is the one who became a biochemist, Dad actually completed his master's in biochemistry before going to medical school in Chicago. While at medical school, Dad managed to get kosher meals by working and living at a kosher nursing home. In his last year of medical school, Dad asked his brother Alvin to introduce him to some girls from New York. Alvin's then girlfriend, Elaine Cohn, who later became his wife, gave him 3 phone numbers to call. My mom, her friend from Brooklyn College, was the second one on the list, and he never called the third one. Dad actually kept that piece of paper for years and would show it to us, and it's probably still in one of our albums. Theirs was a love affair for the ages. I have never seen a couple so in love, so respectful of each other, and also the best of friends. The role models that they showed us as spouses probably explains why all 5 of us kids married our best friends. Mom wholeheartedly believed in Dad's future as a pediatric surgeon and always put his professional needs first. As a result, Dad became a world-renowned pediatric surgeon, and he always credited Mom's self-sacrifice for his success. During the first year of marriage, 1955, they lived in the attic of my mom's parents in Flatbush. Dad made a whopping $25 a month as an intern at Mount Sinai Hospital. Mom supplemented his income as a kindergarten teacher until she was pregnant with me and was asked to leave. In 1957, after his internship, Dad then joined the Air Force. We moved to freezing Kinross, Michigan, where Mark was born in Sault Ste. Marie in 1958. When he was discharged as a first-year resident, we moved out of the grandparents' attic to an apartment on 16th Street in Brooklyn. Dad at that point was making $50 a month. After that, we moved to 210 West 90th Street as Dad continued his residency at Mount Sinai. In 1962, we moved to Montreal, Canada, as Dad did a 1-year chief residency at Montreal Children's Hospital. His boss there was Dr. Chick Coop, who later on would become the United States Surgeon General. In 1962, Richie was born in Montreal. After his chief residency, Dad joined a prominent practice and became chief of pediatric surgery at Mount Sinai. In 1964, Josh was born, and then in 1965, Benji. At that point, the 3-bedroom in Manhattan, 3-bedroom as in I slept in the maid's room, was too small for our family, and we moved to Forest Hills, Queens, where we stayed until 1976. Dad's practice grew, his reputation grew, and thousands of children were saved. A momentous trip with Uncle Alvin to the then USSR, where they met a number of refugees, and then his heroic volunteering as a burn surgeon during the Yom Kippur War at Tel HaShomer Hospital changed that trajectory and had us making Aliyah in 1976. While ultimately we returned to the US in 1981, and Dad spent 20 years as chief of pediatric surgery at Robert Wood Johnson Hospital in New Jersey, Dad and Mom's love for Israel was never diminished. After Mom's stroke in 2013, I had the zchut of moving my parents near us in West Orange, and for the next 5 years, we spent every Shabbat lunch with them, except for Thanksgiving week, Pesach, and some summer weekends. I have to give an extra big thank you to my husband, Mark, who really was there supporting my prioritizing of my parents' needs for those many years. Those 5 years and the 2 following Mom's death in 2019 gave me the most wonderful time with Dad. Time to talk, time to reminisce, time to share my children, and then time to share my grandchildren with him. And we all treasure that time. I want to share one more story and give a special hakarat tov to Dad. Some of you may know that we lost our son Eric, zichrono levracha, to suicide 8 years ago. During some of the more difficult years of Eric's mental illness, he stopped talking to me and my husband. During that time, my parents made it their business to make the 5-hour round-trip visit from Queens to Allentown, Pennsylvania, every month to spend 1 hour with Eric in a coffee shop, reminding him that he was loved, that his parents loved him, and that he was special. That love was reciprocated, and when Mom had her stroke and moved to West Orange, despite the fact that he had cut off ties with us, Eric came to New Jersey to see Mom in the hospital and then visit her in the West Orange house. Eric's love and respect for my parents helped us remain in contact with him during those difficult years, and for that, I am truly grateful to them. Lastly, 2 big thank yous. Thank you to Nico, Dad's helper for the last 2 years, for his dedication and care of Dad. Your respect and care of my father is really so appreciated. And thank you to my brothers, Richie, Josh, and Benji, and their amazing wives for making these last 2 years in Israel as successful as it was. I love you all. Thank you.
No, it's not going to be good. It's not going to stand. לטובת רוב הקהל, וכדי לאפשר הספד מיטבי אשר זורם מקרב לב, אני אדבר באנגלית, ואני אשמח לייצר תרגום בעברית בשבועות הקרובים למי שירצה בכך. I first want to thank Nico so much for all of his dedicated and continual caring for my father in these past 2 years. Your care demonstrated great friendship, affection, and respect, including respect for and concern for my father's own self-respect. For this, you have our eternal gratefulness and friendship. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thanks also to Dr. Maury Budo, who provided so much guidance to us in my father's care recently. I also want to thank my wife, Adina, for her selfless support in my father's care these last 10 years. First, in letting me travel to the U.S. to be with him numerous times, including extended trips for Pesach and Sukkot, and having the holidays without me. Second, hosting my father in our home for 6 months over a 2-year period during Corona. And these past 2 years, going to my father's apartment every 3 weeks, and as the cook of the house, preparing the food. As far as Kibud Av from my own family is concerned, Shali v'shalanu shalahu. This applies, of course, also to my other in-laws as well. In 1964, Rav Yosef Dov Halevi Soloveitchik, the Rav, gave a yahrzeit shir in memory of his father. The topic of the lecture was shlichut, that is, the doctrine of assignment, or perhaps mission. In this lecture, the Rav discusses the verse in Shemot in which God speaks to Moses. Va'ata lecha ve'eshachacha el paro. Ve'eshacha el paro, I will send you to Pharaoh. The Rav learns from this that Almighty God indeed appoints humans, flesh and blood, to carry out assignments, shlichut, on earth, that he assigns them tasks and appoints them to be his messengers, shlichim. In this regard, the Rav cites Rav Kook in one of the handful of times in which he does so. Rav Kook explained the sentence in the Ne'ilah prayer at the end of Yom Kippur, Elokai ad shelo natzarti eini kedai. That is, until the day I was born, I was unable to perform the assignment or assignments which God intended for me. Thus God waited to create me at the exact moment or the exact generation at which I would be able to perform the task, and at which the world needed this task to be performed. My mission in this world was simply not needed a year, 10 years, 100 years before the time of my birth. So man is literally a malach, a messenger of God on this earth, sent here with one or more missions. Man's assignment is not limited in time. It is not a one-time event. It continues from birth to the day of death. However, there is a mystery behind shlichut. First of all, man is by the definition of assignments unable to complete it entirely. Secondly, no one's assignment is more important than the others. Each has a role in the global plan, in the big picture. God measures man not on his accomplishments, but on his efforts. Understanding this can bring an important perspective, a sense of anava, of humility and modesty to one's life. Thirdly, we never know why a particular person was placed on this earth. What exactly was his intended shlichut from God? But we can maybe try to make some guesses. In the case of my father, I would suggest perhaps two possible assignments or missions. There was, of course, also his small role in freeing Soviet Jewry. There was his unique relationship with my mother, a model to others. And there was his unique relationship with his twin brother, Alvin. They were among the most famous twins in the Brooklyn of the 1940s, but I will not discuss these. First, he was placed here to be a surgeon, to be a pediatric surgeon. Medicine is by no means my field, but as an outsider, I understood that he was considered a particularly talented pediatric surgeon and with a particularly good bedside manner with the child patients, if not necessarily with all of the staff. Again, I have no way to calculate. I don't know the field at all, but if I guess at least 7 operations a week, 48 weeks a year, perhaps 42 years, I get at a minimum of 14,000 operations. Perhaps the number is closer to 20,000, maybe more. I really don't know. Maybe my brother Mark can give a better guess. I know that a large percentage were life-saving, or at least life-changing for children. That's a lot of operations, a substantial contribution, a substantial step in doing God's work of improving people's lives on this earth. You should know that in Shul, in Highland Park, he was usually given the Aliyah to Torah of Shirat Hayam in Parshat Beshalach, since the Aliyah concludes, Ki ani Hashem rofecha. I recall also his weeks at Tel HaShomer Hospital during the Yom Kippur War, working endless hours to save the lives of wounded Israeli soldiers. That was his special contribution, specifically to the Jewish people. And it drove his decision to make Aliyah, to try to focus his efforts on healing Jewish children after years of helping those of the general population. I know it was a tremendous disappointment to him when the job did not work out due to the Israeli medical system of the time, and when he had to choose between living in Israel and continuing to save children. And he chose continuing God's work in saving children over continuing to live in Israel full-time. His second mission, I will suggest, was to be a grandfather. He was a very good father, maybe even an excellent father, but he was an exceptional grandfather, world class. The grandchildren were his chiefest joy and the center of his world. We remember him playing with the older ones at the lake house in the lake. We remember him giving the children bubble baths, using shampoo to fashion their hair into attractive, pointy, alien spikes. And he taught them the basics of his understanding of nutrition, the 4 basic food groups: donuts, chocolate chip cookies, jelly beans, and Twizzlers. Even those gross green, blue, and yellow Twizzlers. Now, there are others here who may have a different food list. That is a topic to be discussed at a future family symposium. For the health conscious, we can instead say that he chose waffles and ice cream, bagels, salami, and frankfurters. Now, we know his favorite pictures of grandchildren were those with the chocolate all over their faces. He loved each and every one of the grandchildren, and he had no favorites. Well, maybe Naama, but only recently, after she finally went to medical school and she did something interesting and worthwhile for a living. It was very interesting and very beautiful to watch. Whichever grandchild was with him at a particular time, that child was the center of the universe, the focus of his joy at that moment. Each one felt special. Each was a precious and unique gem, a jewel in his crown. Truly and literally, Ateret Zkenim B'nei Banim V'Tiferet Banim Avotam. As my mother's pillow says, if I knew grandchildren were this much fun, I would have had them earlier. He had great-grandchildren only starting in his 80s, so he was less active with them, but he enjoyed them. Particularly their visits to West Orange brought joy and brightness to his life there. He loved watching them eat. I will also briefly comment that after my father spent many years dedicated to and focusing on caring for my mother in her illness, I am glad that he had almost 3 good years where he was able to live in our houses and to see the Israeli children and grandchildren, as well as great-grandchildren, in a more ongoing and intense fashion than in the few years before. The Corona years were initially a very good time for him, a blessing. I'm also glad that he was granted enough years to see a next batch of grandchildren get married. I think he partially lived to make these weddings. And I am glad that he got to enjoy a large family group at Michal's wedding, a few short weeks before he started to take a turn for the worse. You should know, Michal and my new son-in-law Barak visited him and Hadassah and Manny in Jerusalem in mid-June this year, a few weeks before he kind of declined. My father was starting to be even a bit slower and less focused. I was told in Shabbat that Barak picked up Hadassah's new baby Holly and he held her. Daddy looked at Barak and he said, "It looks good on you." Always a razor-sharp focus, eyes on the prize. Upon further reflection, both of these missions of my father were focused on children, on the future generations, loving, nurturing, and caring for them, and concern for their future. But now his various missions on earth are done, a life well lived. And his next mission is to intercede for us up in heaven, to be a melitz yosher, to ask, to plead in these horrible and painful times for our nation, that God provide healing for the physical and the psychological wounds, healing of the injured, of the captives, of the bereaved families, of the weary soldiers, and of those displaced from their homes and livelihoods. Ki ani Hashem rofecha.
בשנים האחרונות הייתי לצערי בעולם הזה לא מעט פעמים. ותמיד זה היה לאירועים מאוד עצובים. אנשים שסבלו הרבה שנים. אנשים שנפטרו טרם עת. ופה אנחנו מאוד עצובים, אבל זה בן אדם שהלך בביתו, בשיבה טובה, ומוות בנשיקה עם חבר טוב לצידו. אז זה עצוב, אבל זה לא טרגדיה. עכשיו, אני למדתי הרבה דברים מאבא. אני למדתי שהחיים המקצועיים שלך צריכים להיות חיים של שליחות ותרומה לזולת ולכלל. אני למדתי שאפשר להיות גאה מאוד מאוד ביכולות המקצועיות שלך, אבל עדיין לחיות את חייך כאדם צנוע. אני למדתי מה זה ציונות מגשימה, אמיתית ובלי מרכאות. אני למדתי שמשפחה זה משהו שהוא מעל לכל. זה גם שאתה עסוק מאוד ואפילו לא נוכח הרבה, אתה יוכל להיות אבא וסבא מצוין, מסור ומשקיע. אבא היה בן, אח, בעל, אבא, סבא, וסבא רבא, יוצא דופן. אני למדתי שלנשק לילדים שלך זה אולי מביך אותם, במרחק שהם מבוגרים, אבל זה משהו שנשאר אצלם למשך עשורים אחר כך. למי שהכיר את אבא ב5 השנים האחרונות, הוא היה חצי בן אדם. כשהוא היה עם אמא, היית רואה מה זה ידבק אדם לאשתו ויהיה לבשר אחת. בשנים האחרונות לחייה, הוא הקדיש לאמא את הכל, שימש ושירת את כל צרכיה, ומאז שהוא הלכה, כאילו נאבד איבר חיוני בגופו. אנחנו מודים לך, אבא, מאוד, שבשנים האחרונות אפשרת לנו את הזכות להחזיר לך קמצוץ ממה שנתת לנו למשך כל חיינו. And thank you to Dad's friend Nico, whose love and caring gave Dad life, health, and dignity in these past 2 years and allowed him to live out his final years with us in his beloved city of Jerusalem.
א', אני מראש מתנצל שהפעם, להבדיל מפעם קודמת שעמדתי בבמה זו, אני אדבר באנגלית. היות ויש משפחה רבה בחו"ל שהיו רוצים להיות כאן ולא הספיקו ומשקיפים עלינו בזום. כמו שאתם מבינים, יש כל כך הרבה לספר על אבא, שיכולתי באמת לעמוד כאן ערב שלם. והתלבטנו, אני והאחים שלי, מה נכון לעשות. למהר, להזדרז, להספיק, להרוויח אולי עוד שעה כדי שיהיה לנו פחות יום של שבעה, אבל היה ברור לנו שהדרך הנכונה להיפרד באבא זה לא למהר, זה להיות פה איתו ביחד ולתת לו את הכבוד שהוא ראוי לו. אסתפק ואומר שהוא היה צדיק, גיבור, ציוני דגול שהנחיל את זה לילדיו, מציל חיים במלוא מובן המילה, ומעל הכל סבא רבא, סבא, אבא ובעל למופת. הוא גידל משפחה לתפארת של ילדים, נכדים ונינים, וחסרונו יהיה עצום. זכינו במיוחד שיכולנו בשנים האחרונות להיות לצידו, ליהנות בחברתו ולתת לו את כל הכבוד והאהבה הראויים עד לרגעיו האחרונים. I also want to make sure to take an opportunity to thank those who let us show Dad the kavod, especially the 5 years since Mom passed. Those first 3 years, which quickly became the COVID years, Dad literally lived in 2 countries, equally dividing his time among the 4 houses and spending time with each and every one of us, quality time to be with his grandchildren. And in some ways for him, the COVID period was a blessing because it meant we were at home and we could be with him. Then we made the decision when we were finishing Shlichut that the balance was going to be upended, and there would be 3 of us here. And so the right decision was to bring Dad back to Yerushalayim, back to the one home that was still his and Mom's, back to a country that he loved, even though, unfortunately, it didn't always love him. To bring him back so he could be with family and be with family regularly. And in the last month, we worked very, very hard to bring him even closer to us, to Modi'in, to a house that's now going to stand empty. But we'll figure that out over Shiva. The last 3 years and the 2 years before would not have been possible without my family. Without Sharon's commitment and understanding, and recognizing how important it was to me and to us as a family to be able to share that time with him. To Avidan, Nadav, and Tamir, who would spare no energy, no time, and no personal commitment to change if it required, if Dad needed them for anything. Up until his very last days, when Tamir went to be with him, to lay tefillin, it's enough. Thank you. Those who know me would not be surprised to know that I've been preparing for this moment for years. I have spent much time thinking about what I would say when the inevitable moment arrived, about how I could accomplish all that Dad meant not only to me, but also to so many others. There are many probably who owe him a debt of life or hope, but don't even know that. Whether that be Irwin Herbert Rogers, somewhere in Chicago, the family of Shvili, who he treated day in, day out in the old Shari Tzedek, or a wounded soldier who has less scars because he was touched by Dad. Some of those people who have that debt are here today. Others just recall being stitched or having their ears pierced, very likely in our kitchen. I was probably 10 or 11 when I first learned of the concept of the 36 tzaddikim, Lamed Vav HaTzaddikim, who our sages say exist, who are the 36 righteous who grace this world at any one time. It is said that they are replaced when one passes. Well, in my mind, a slot is opened. For to me, it was clear from the first time I learned about it that my dad was one of those 36. For he knew so much, did so much, and led by example, that for me it was never in doubt. His place among the 36 was etched in stone, and I hope the next in line is as worthy. Dad was truly dedicated to mankind. He placed saving human lives above all else. This was his livelihood and his passion. He would stop at nothing to try and allow a child a better life, if even for just a few years. His commitment was to allow families to maximize the joy of being a family for as long as possible. He, of course, knew from his own personal experience what it meant to have and be a part of a family. And he held human life in sanctity, becoming not only a one-of-a-kind surgeon, but also sought after as a renowned expert on medical ethics based on his own experiences and his knowledge. Dad was dedicated to Judaism and the Jewish people. He was the Talmid of Rav Soloveitchik and Rav David Lifshitz, who could easily have gone on to a life of Jewish learning and jointly won the Talmud Prize with Alvin in their graduating class in Yeshiva University. A friend once told me a few years ago that his own father, a well-renowned rabbi in his own right, would always tell him as he grew up of the story of these two brothers in YU who were Iluyim, and always had a light lit in their room as they learned just one more blot of Gemara. When we finally met, and then later, when I introduced him to Dad, it was a moment that brought this tale to reality. No one excelled more than the twins and were more committed to their Jewish study. And through all the challenges that his professional life brought with him, he never wavered or compromised. His dedication to the Jewish people was proven beyond a doubt in the fall of 1971, when he went along with his twin Alvin to the Soviet Union to visit Jews who refused the right to emigrate, to bring them messages, sidurim and machzorim for chagim, and to offer them support and friendship. Some of those he met became friends for life. Others just knew that they were touched by two angels who came from afar. This was a time when the communist regime was at its hardest, and trips like this entailed risk. So much risk that the Nativ representative refused to let Mom, a mother of 5 young children, travel with him, and in her stead, his brother was the partner. For the first time in more than 20 years, they would once again be roommates, and the stories of that part of the trip are legendary. Judaism and the Jewish people were his guiding lights. Dad was dedicated to the state of Israel. We grew up on stories of packing secret weapons shipments into the YU dormitories to send to Israel during the War of Independence. His devotion and commitment manifested itself in October 1973, when he came at the height of the Yom Kippur War to volunteer as a well-trained surgeon to treat wounded soldiers at Tel HaShomer. I can still recall being told to go home from school to my Aunt Carol's house, and then speaking to him on the phone from JFK as he was preparing to board the last flight from New York to Tel Aviv. 15 years ago, he was able to enjoy a reunion at Tel HaShomer with the medical staff and some of the wounded, an event documented on Israeli television. It was a proud moment for his children and grandchildren to see up close what an example their grandfather is. His commitment to Israel then led him to make Aliyah in 1976 and lay the path for 3 of his children to live here today. And it's befitting that his last 2 years he spent here in Israel and that he and Mom are buried here. Dad was dedicated to family. He had 5 children along with their 5 spouses, all following his footsteps of commitment to Judaism, Israel, and family. He lived to know all his 16 grandchildren, each of whom have their own grandpa's story and indelible moment. They all know of his life for ice cream, hot dogs, French fries, and pizza. For him, that was gourmet fare at its finest. And his daughters and daughters-in-law were always challenged to explain that just because Grandpa doesn't eat vegetables, their children still should. He also got to see and hold 22 great-grandchildren, who are the next least in the dynasty that he created. There's so much that he did for each and every one of us. He was totally committed to ensuring our futures by pushing and enabling all of us to achieve and to study. Even if not all of us went on to be doctors, and he didn't know what exactly our professions entailed. Even at the most demanding of times for him professionally, he always embraced every moment that he had to be with family, and extended beyond just us, but also to so many cousins and relatives and his own siblings who he loved spending quality time with, and for who he was always available to support and consult. Losing his sisters way too early left a huge gap in his heart. And there's no doubt that the proximity of Mom's stroke and deterioration at the same time of the sudden loss of Alvin, his twin and eternal partner in crime, was probably his hardest few months in the 59 years I knew him. If there's one lasting legacy that made him happiest is the close and special relationship that exists between his grandchildren and watching them together. He then could see that he and Mom definitely did something right, and the love and respect that they have been able to show him, especially during Mom's 5-year illness and the 5 years since Mom is gone, is also testimony to how he touched each and every one of them. And finally, Dad was dedicated to Mom. Words can't do it justice. Theirs was a relationship like none other, 64 years strong. She was his rock. She was his compass. She enabled him to do all that he did for everyone else. She made the sacrifice and took on the risks of his trips to the Soviet Union and into an unknown war zone in Israel. He never had to worry about the kids or a place to live, because she always hung the curtains, whether in Manhattan, Brooklyn, Kinross, Michigan, Montreal, Forest Hills, Jerusalem, or Highland Park. She was his partner in rock when they made the difficult decision to make Aliyah, and was by his side when they had to make the no less difficult decision to return to America. And when it was her turn to be looked after and cared for, he was there for her 24/7 as a true living example for all of us, especially his children and grandchildren, to learn from. And we were privileged to then do the same when Mom passed, and it was our turn to make sure he could continue, enjoy, thrive, and be surrounded with the same love over the last 5 years. And they have been good and an enriching and rewarding 5 years, even with the bumps of COVID. In the last 3 weeks of his life, it was harder and harder to understand when he spoke, even more than usual. But there were words that he did pronounce with clarity. It was when he would speak about needing to pick up Anne or go see her. His words were crystal clear. It's clear now that this wasn't hallucination. It was a statement that he was ready. And now they will appropriately, once again, lie side by side. Dad, I hope that we find an appropriate 36th tzaddik to take your place. Someone who can come close to all the values that you embraced and taught us. Someone who understands life's priorities. Someone who stands for dedication to our people, our faith, our country, and our families. The type of tzaddik that we need. And I hope we have made you proud and will continue with Mom to show us the way to continue with Derech Eretz, Tzniut, V'avat Chinam L'chol Adam.
אני מתאר שהדוברי האנגלית פה מבינים למה אני פה, אני לא בן. אז רק להסביר, מדברים על האח של אנקל אירווין, אני הבן שלו, אני הנציג שלו פה. ועכשיו אני אהפוך לאנגלית. The first thing I wanted to say, I kept my list of what everyone was saying and pulling things off my list. And there was one line that we came close to but we didn't say. Whenever I spoke with Uncle Irwin about the time he spent with Aunt Anne, whenever we talked about how he would never leave her alone, etc., he always said, she did it for me for 60 years. It's okay if I do it for her for a couple of years. And that is really the story of Aunt Anne and Uncle Irwin. So in a way, I'm here representing a lot of people, whether it's my father, Alvin, who was his twin, his woo-mate, whether it was for all 4 of Esther and Selig's children, or all 8 of the people in the couples, whether it was the entire Feiner family, where Uncle Irwin was the last one, of the Krasna family, Isaac Chevelle Shebedel Chaim Arokim is the only grandchild of Zara Krasna left, and Adele's alive. So first, I have to say, in the name of my family, that a tremendous hakarat tov to my aunt and uncle, who always, since we made Aliyah, treated us like one of their children. There was never anything they did in their family, going away, having a party, a simcha, that we weren't included in as if we were one of their children. I think a lot of it was my uncle's great naches at the irony of my father being stuck with a Zionist child despite all their efforts to avoid that. I think that made him happy. What I want to say, before it became a sisma, the word Torah Umada really is what defined my uncle. And I want to give 2 stories that show that point, one about life and one about death. My wife was pregnant with triplets, and the doctors, including Jewish ones, had suggested doing something called a selective reduction, which selective reduction, I assume people know that. And I called my uncle because this is a question, these are the life and death questions that you don't know how to ask. And I spoke to my uncle, and he said, I'm going to do 2 things. He said, I'm going to call Moshe Tendler, Rabbi Tendler, sorry, and tell him you're going to call him. And then I'm going to speak to the head of neonatology, and then I'll get back to you. And that's what happened. I spoke to Rav Tendler. My uncle came back, gave me a report from the neonatologist, because only combining together, there was no such thing as Das Torah, and there was no such thing as Das Doctor. His decisions were always a combination of both of those. My uncle had the zchut of being in the room with us when my father passed. And it was a tremendous bracha. And I remember after he passed, we were in the room, we were still saying Tehillim, we were starting to make phone calls and logistics. At some point, after about 15 minutes, Uncle Irwin left the room and came back 5 minutes later with a stethoscope. My father was already disconnected from all the machines that very clearly showed that he had passed. And my uncle put the stethoscope in his ears, and he checked in several places to see if my father was alive. And he then explained to me that there is a need that you have to check about breathing. It doesn't matter what any of the things said. And he had to make sure halachically, even though it was known, that my father had passed. And I look at those two moments as the pure definition both of who my uncle was and what the real meaning of Torah and Mada are.
הבנים יבואו לפה.
פרק ט"ז בתהילים. מי יכתוב לדוד שומרי ניאל כי רוסי סיבוך. אומר תעדיני אדיני אותו תגוסים על הולכו. תקדושים אשר באו רצינו על דירי כולכם ציבום. עיר בו עצוי זמחם בורו ועל הסם הסכם מידום ועל עצוי שפריסון על סרוסוי. אדוני ונאז חלקי בחויסי עדות ומרגורו לי. חבולים נפלו לי בנים אף נחנה שפרו לוי. אבורס עין אשר אותן אפילו תצפוני חיליו איסוי. שביסי אדוני לתתומית כי למיני בנמוי. לא כן צומח לבילה גלפנדר וצריש כאן בטח. כאילו הסדר זו ימנע שמישהו לפתח חסד חולי רויס שומס. תוי תהיה לי אוי רח חיים צוי בסמכוי תתפונכו נעימוי במלכונת
קדש מרבה, כמה דרכותי ומלכותי. העיקרון ויכול חיים בית ישראל, בגלל המקרים בבוא הבית. ישתבח ויתפעם ויתרומם ויתנשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתעלה שמין קודשה וקרובו. לעילם מינו וחטא ושירתה, שוש וחטא ונחמתה, דקה מעמה וברוא אמן. יחי שמה רבה משמיה, וחיים ומנו וחו ישראל וברוא אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, ויעשה שלום עלינו, וחלקו ישראל וברוא אמן.
לפי מנהג ירושלים כל יוצאי חלצה ולא ילכו אחר המיטה. הבנים, הבת, נכדים, נכדות שרוצים להיות בקבורה יצאו עכשיו למקום הקבר לפני הנפטר. אתה הנכד? לא פה לחכות, רגע, הם נכדים. אתם נכדים? אתה נכד? לא, אז נהוג שלא. רק כאלה שנשואים לנכדה.
יש כמה.
כן, לא לעשות, כן. תראה שכל הצאצאים מתקדמים שם. 700 מטר. אפשר להרים? מדהים. נעבור שמאלה. זהו. הפח נשבר ואנחנו נמנפנו. והנה ואדינו אלוהינו, עלינו מעשה ידינו קוננו, עלינו מעשה ידינו קוננו. יוישב בשי ישראל יום בשי שדי סלינו, נאמר לאדינו מחסים צור סילה אל תחבוי. כי יצליחו מפחי כמו דבר אבוית וברוס היוסח לך וסך כנופו ותחסי צינום שיחו אמיתוי. לא יסרו מפחד אלוהינו וחצי ופים המנבר באופן הלוך כתב ושו צהריים. יפול מצדך אלוהו ומומינך לך לא יגרש רק בעיניך תביא של מעשה שאין תראה. כי אתה אביני מחסי אליין סנטו מוינךו. לא יסרוני אליך רוב ונגע יקרב בו עליך כי מלוך הביצה ולוך לשמורכו בכל דרוכךו. על כפיים ויסורךו פן תגוי באבן רגלךו. על שחל ופסן תדרוך תרמו יסקו וזנין כי בחושק ואוכלתי עוסק ואוכי יודע שמי קראיני בעיניהם אנוכי בצורה אחת צבע אחתיו. אורך אני יזגל ברבי שעושי. עקביו בן מעלה יסתכל בשלישות דבורים אין עתו בו לידי אווירו. דע מאין בו סולנתו ילך ולפני מי עתו עשי ליתן דין לחשבוין. ואין בו סלתי בו סולנתו ילך עם כמו פורים או בסילאו. ולפני מי עתו עשי ליתן דין לחשבוין לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא וברחום יכפר ובוין ולא ישחיס. וירבו לו שיפוי ולא יעיר כל חמוסוי. קדיש. יש מישהו שיכול לומר קדיש?
יתגדל ויקדש שמי רבה. ועמד יברח חירותי וימליך מחותי. וחייכון וביומכון חיי לכל בית ישראל בעגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך לעולם ומאה ומאה. ברך וישתבח ויתאר ויתמם יתנשא. יתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשה בריחו. לעילם עם כל ברכתה ושירתה וחתה ונחמתה ואמירם בעלמה ואמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה משמיה לחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן.
מקום הקבר במרחק של כ-700-800 מטר. אנחנו פונים פה שמאלה וכל הזמן ישר. מי שרוצה לבוא עם כלי רכב אפשר, יש שם גם מקום להסתובב. אנחנו נוסעים בקצב איטי, אפשר גם להתקדם ברגל. אלוהים אדינו אלוהינו עלינו מעשה ידינו כל העובדים אוי מלא הנה מארץ מצוור סילף תחבוי קצב כל פרשון דבר הבוית ובוסי יוסלוך סך נפול תחסי צינור סושנה מיתוי לא ישרון בחדינו וחץ ופנרו דבר רפת אלוך חץ ושו צהריים איפוין מצידך אלף ובובו מינך הולך לא יגוש רק בעינך תביט ושיל מסה שאם תראה כי אתה הנה מחסי אליה סנטו מורינך לא יסון אלך ורוב נגע לא יקרא בו הולכו כי מלוכו ביצה ולוך לשמורכו בכל דרכךו על כפיים יסעונכו פן תגוי באבן רגלךו על שחל ופסן תדרוך תרמו יסקו וסנין כי הביא חושק ועבדתו סגביהו כי יודע שמי קראיני בעיניהם אלך בצורה אחת צרבח עבדיהו אוי רך ימים מזביהו הרבי שעושי יוישב בסייסר אלי משלישת היסלינון אוי מרנד אינוי מרשים סודוסי לא אהב תחבוי כי יצלחו מפח יקלוחים דבר אבויס וברוס לא יוסך לא אוכלי סחת נופו ותחסי צינוב סוחר אמיתוי לא יסרון פחד דוינו וחצי ופנימום דבר בוי פנה הלוך מקטב ושות צהריים היפועל מצדכו אלף ובוא במינךו אליך לא יגוש רק בעינךו תביט של מסה שאם תראה כי אתה דיני מחסי אל יין סנטו מעינךו לא יסרונה אליך רוב ונגע לא יקרב בעולךו כי מלוכו וצעה ולוך לשמורכו בכל דרכךו על כפיים יסעונכו פן תגוי באבן רגלךו על שחל ופסן תדרוך תרמו יספי וסנין כי הביא חושק והפנתר סגבר כי ידע שמי קראיני ועיניהם אלך בצורה אחת צבח עבדיהו אוי רך ימים זה ברבי שעושי יוסלפו יהי שבשי ישראל יום יצא שדי יסלנו למען לה אם רצים צורו סילף תחבוי כי יצליחו פח יקרים דבר אבוית וברוס יוסך לא פסח נופו ותחסי צינוב סוחר אמיתוי לא יסירו מפחד לא ילו וחצי ופנימום דבר בו אפל הלוך כתב ושו צהריים איפועל מצדכו אלף ובובו ממינךו אלךו לא יגרוש רק בעינךו תביט ושילו מסרו שאם תראה כתרים ממחסי אל יין סנטו מעינךו לא יסעונה אלךו רוב ונגע לא יקרב בעולךו כי מלוכו וצע ולוך לשמורכו בכל דרכךו על כפיים יסעונכו פן תגוי באבן רגלךו על שחל ופסן תדרוך תרמו יספי וסנין כי הביא חושק מהפנתר הסגבר וידע שמי יקרואיני בעיניהם הלכו בצורך על צבח עבדהו. אוי ערך יומי יושב הרבי שעושי. יושב בסייסר עדים צד שדי סלינון. אוי מעל הדיני מרח זמצור שלה יפתח בוי. כי יצוף אי פרק ומדבר הבויס. וברוס יוסך לוך וסחס נופוב תחסד סינו של חמיתוי. לא יסירו מפחד לא ילו. וחצי ופעימום. דבר באופן להלוך וקצב שהוא צהריים. איפה אין צידך אלף ובובו ממנך הולך לא יגוש. רק ואינך תביט ושילום עשרה שאין תראה כי אתה דיני מחסי אליון שמת מוינךו לא יסונה לך רוב ונגד יקרא בהולכו כי מלוך וצעה ולוך לשמורכו בכל דרוכךו עד כפיים מסעונכו פן תגי באבן רגדךו על שחל בופסן תדרוך תרמויס כשהוא בסנים כי הביא חשק והפדהו עסק בהו כי ידע שמי יקרואיני ועיניהם ולכה בצורה חלצהו ואחבדהו אוי רחמי עזב הרבי שעושי יושב בסייסר עדים תשע דיינון אמר נא דינוי מחסים שעושי לא אבטח בוי יד לכל כך ישב דבר הבויס וברוס יוסף לך מסך נפוב תחסי תנו של חמיתוי תדליק לנו תאורה לכל הכביש. לא. ברוס יוסך לך מסך נופוב תחסד שנו שלך מיתוי. לא יסירו מפחד לא ילו וחצי יופי מום. דבר באופן להלוך וכתב ישו צהריים. איפן מצידך אלף ובובו מנךו. לך לא יגוש רק בעינך תביטו של משהו שאם תראה כי אתה דיני מחסי אל יסמת מעינךו לא יסונה לך רוב ונגע ויקרב בהולכו כי מלוך בצעה ולוך לשמורכו בכל דרוכךו עד כפיים יסעונכו פן תגעי באבן רגלךו על שחל בופסן תדרוך תרמויס כפיר בסנין כי הביא חשק ועבדתו סביב כי יודע שמי יקרואיני בעיניהם הלכו בצורה אחת צבח עבדהו אוי ערך יומי מזביע ברבי שעושי לא שהם יגידו קדש מאיפה שהם נמצאים הקביו בן מעלה אמר יסתכל בשלישות דברים אין אתה בוא לידי אבירו דע מאין בו סודן אתה ילך ולפני מי אתה עושי תיתן דין נחש בו מאין בו סודן סוכרונן אתה ילך מכם מפורים או בסדר ולפני מי אתה עושי תיתן דין נחש בו לפני מלך מלכם לוחים הקדוש ברוך הוא והוא רחום יכפר ובוינו לא ישחיז ובו לא ישיב הפועל ולא יעיר כל חמוסוי הבנים יגידו קדיש איפה שהם עומדים
קדיש
אמן
וחייכון ומלכון וחיי לכל בית ישראל חג עליו זמן קריב ואימו אמן יהי שמי רב ברוך שלום אומר ומהיה יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי לקודשה בריחו לעילה מכל ברכתה ושירתה ושבחתה ונחמתה תמירה בימיו ואמרו אמן יהי שלום רבה משמיה וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן עושה שלום במרומיו הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן
חיים בן אושר זאבי. כי מלוכו ויחזר אלו ושמורכו בכל דרובכו. מצוות כיסוי הקבר יכולים להשתתף גם הבנים והנכדים, נוהגים שלא מעבירים את המעדר מיד ליד. והוא רחום יחפה עומנו וישחיר ובולו שיעבוי ולא ישחיר והוא רחום יחפה עומנו וישחיר ובולו שיעבוי ולא יעיר כל חמות.
You won't let me? Okay. Sound more granddaughter.
If you go to do it, they're not going to pull it out of your hand.
Eat up. You can do what you want.
You can do what you want.
It's all right. It's okay. Shine it straight.
Did you know that we had someone speaking now? Yeah, I'm Tom. That's really right when you're on the left. Yeah, did not fall in. baby shoes? Where's the baby shoes? You're not wearing anything anyway, right?
I know, I'm sneaking. I'm camping.
You want to go?
So all the kids are gone. That's all right.
Yes. Hey, oh, the cards. There you go. We used to bring dirt over here. Bring dirt closer.
So I guess they have to fix it.
פרק ט"ז בתהילים. מיכתום לדוד שומרני אין כבסיסי בוך. אומרת לאדוני אדוני עוד תבוסי בנולכו. בקדושים אשר באורסים ומדריך כל כך ציבור. עיר בו עצבוי שמח אמור, בעל השיח נזכה מדום ועל סוי שמי שמע ספסוי. אדוני מנס חלקי וחויסייתו תומיר גורלי. חבולים נפלו לי בנים, אף נחלת שופרו אלוהי. אבורס עיני אשר יוצוני אף לילוי סיסרוני חיליוי סוי. שיביסי אדוני נגדי תמיד תימני בלמוית. לא כן שמח ליבי והגל כבודי ושריש כנו בטח. כי לא יישא זו עם נפשי לי שויל. ותתן חסידכו לרואי שוחס. תוי בי עיני אוירח חיים. תוי וסמוכוי סספונכו. נעימויס וימינכו נצח. קדיש.
יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה.
אמן.
יעמד יברח חילוצי וימליך מלכותי. בחייכון ובמלכון ובחיי כל בית ישראל. בעגלה ובכתרים ואימו יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתנמה ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתעלה שמי קדושה בריחו עילה מכל בחטא ושירתה תוש בחטא ונחמתה גם מרם ויאמר ואימו אמן יש למה רבה מן שמיה וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואימו אמן עושה שלום ואימו אב ויעשה שלום בינינו ועל ישראל ואימו אמן
ישראל חיים בן אושר זלי, בשם החברה קדישה, בשם בני המשפחה, הקרובים, הידידים והמלווים, אנו מבקשים ממך סליחה ומחילה. בשם החס וחלילה פגענו בכבודך, הן בטהרה בנשיאת המיטה ובתיקון הקבר. אנא הסלח לנו כי אין זו אלא שגגה. החברה קדישה נהגה איתך כמנהגי ירושלים עיר הקודש. יהיה נא מליץ יושר עבור משפחתך, קרוביך וידידיך, ועבור כל כלל ישראל בכל תפוצות ישראל. וייתן השם ובילה המוות לנצח, ומחה השם אלוקים דמעה מעל כל פנים, ובא לציון גואל במהרה בימינו אמן. לך בשלום ותנוח בשלום ותעמוד לגורלך לקץ הימים.
יש עוד דבר הספד של אחינו
Okay, these are words from my dad and a little bit also from my mom. My dad was one of the greatest men I've known. He was my first hero and role model for my work and my life. He always took care of patients regardless of their ability to pay, and treated every infant from any cultural or religious background as a unique nema that he would never abandon. Long before it was PC to accept children with Down syndrome into the mainstream, he was a spokesman for them that required life-saving surgery. I also learned a hernia operation is equal to 3 ties. A diaphragm hernia was much more serious, worthy of a gold bottle opener. Okay. And besides, whoever heard of a Jew becoming a doctor in the U.S. in the 1950s and getting into an AOA honor society becoming a surgeon? Who heard of such things? I was in 4th grade when I realized he was what I wanted to be. I decided I'd become a pediatric surgeon, and we were told to write a composition. My teacher, you're good. Yeah, thank you. My teacher asked why I wanted to be a foot doctor. I said, that's a podiatrist. He was a surgeon of babies. He worked at 9 hospitals across New York boroughs, out of Long Island in the days of payphones. He would be on his way home for Shabbat after doing 2 hernias and on an appendix, only to hear that he had to go turn around to LIJ for life-saving surgeries on a born baby with severe anomalies. Sorry, guys. He wrote over 200 paper chapters and books, including articles with Ita about child abuse and books with Rav Moshe Tendler, his old chavruta, about Jewish medical ethics. He even built the first heart-lung machine in New York and NYC. The first turning point in my life was when I was 12 and he took me to watch an appendectomy. I was forever hooked. Not me, Mark Krasna. In a lighter note, when I was 12, Grandma Esther was visiting for Shabbat and my dad told me to take out the trash. She jumped up and said, he can't do that. He's the son of a doctor. And he asked who should do it instead. And she said, you should, of course. And he said, but I'm a famous surgeon. And she answered, yeah, but your father sold gloves. Going to Israel for the first time for my bar mitzvah and connecting with our Israeli Krasna and Shine Garden relatives was eye-opening for us as kids. We proudly went every year to see where the battles of the 6-Day War took place. And he was a Zionist long before it became popular. And we grew up knowing that someday we would go to Israel. He was sent to Russia with his twin brother Alvin to contact refuseniks, and then resulted in the release of Dr. Herman Branover and a real life scientist who developed the Red October. He always was helping friends and family in any way he could and never took the limelight. His trip to volunteer during Yom Kippur was the final step in his moving to Israel. He was shocked and humbled and proud of the injured soldiers he helped. Afterwards, he led us on Aliyah to Yerushalayim. When I returned to the U.S., I had the privilege of operating with him on babies the size of your hand. He was an amazing and skillful surgeon and performed complicated surgery on newborn babies with audacity. He even had an instrument named after himself called the Krasna enema. He trained hundreds of students, interns, and residents and professors at Mount Sinai and later at Shaarei Tzedek and Hadassah, where he would go for rounds whenever he was coming to Israel. When he left Israel, it was a hard decision, but in his mind, he could not save more babies in Israel working with the system than he would be able to save American babies instead. But his heart never left Israel. Like Mom, he would tear up hearing songs from Yom Kippur or even saying Birkat HaMazon to the tune of Hatikva. He had a strong work ethic and doing many more hours and many more calls than anyone his age or academic seniority. Once Mom got sick, he never left her side. He showed us how to love and respect a wife, Irwin, and how to be hands-on in Grandpa in the pool and in the lake or in Israel. He never hesitated to sew up children or grandchild, especially on the kitchen table. He always tried to protect us from sadness and cruelty in the world. Lastly, some reflections from Diane. I knew Grandpa Irwin as a father-in-law and a grandfather and a loving husband and father. I also had the privilege of knowing him as a surgeon. I anesthetized many of the babies and kids he operated on. The very first time I met him, long before Dr. Mark Krasna appeared in Robert Wood, I was putting a baby to sleep when Dr. Irwin strolled into the OR with an entourage of residents and interns and med students, and he abruptly pulled the blanket off the baby to examine him, and I exclaimed, "Whoa, don't touch him. He isn't deep and will Laryn's got that." There was a palpable gasp from the nurses and another physician who murmured, "He's the chief of pediatric surgery." Irwin said, okay, she's right. Once the baby was intubated, he asked me to stand next to him and took my hand to feel and examine the baby for the hernia he was about to repair. A few years later, I called him from Boston to tell him Vered was sick and I thought she had a hernia. He told me to see his old friend Hardy Henderson at Boston Children's, and we went to the chief resident, wasn't there. Irwin said to me, "Trust yourself and know what you saw and you felt. You know better." He once wrote an article called The Polaroid Diagnosis. If a photo could have been taken when the parent witnessed the bulge, that they could show the diagnosis to anyone who doubted them. This is the one and only anecdotal story that could be told to the man who walked in the house in Highland Park and immediately asked whose diapers need changing, and then would fill up the tub with bubbles for shampoo and bath fun. I hope that Anne has a convertible in heaven and can drive around with her boyfriend now and keep a watch over all of us because we need it. Love and respect, Diane. Thank you. Thanks. Oh, sorry.
What happened? Your left? No. Do the Shirot, right? We need to do the Shirot, right? Somebody needs to tell them, not one of us.
We'll assemble.
Somebody needs to, not one of us.
אחרי ששמים אבנים, לעשות שני שורות על הכביש.
We change our shoes after before we walk.
On the כביש.
Can I start the gathering or we do that afterwards? Sarah, you okay?
Just give a. You're on a complete schedule. So we give them.
Change on the
Why don't
כביש.
you go this way? Why don't you go this way? Oh, you want to go to start? Yeah. Oh, you have one.
Got my shoes. Tamir, who has the bag of my shoes?
Benji, Josh, start over here.
Who has my sandals? Tamir? Like walking on the sandals. You know where the bag is? Show.
Don't forget Mom.
I'll change that. I can go there. I can walk in the push. Do we change it to after or after?
You guys are here?
I'm just waiting for Ethan, Richie.
I'm right behind you.
Richie?
Richie is.
Do we have to wait for him? Richie, staff and switch.
אבנים עוברים בין השורות להגיד המקום מנחם, וכשמסיימים לסגור את השורות. המקום מנחם עוד המקום מנחם עוד
המקום מנחם אתכם בתוך שער אבלי ציון וירושלים. This concludes the live stream.